Hello, everybody. This is the final part, part four. This one's called Opening Japan. And remember, this is our series on how the U.S. acquired its territories and how it expanded in the 1840s. Let's get started. Let's learn some history. Here we go. So the story starts here with this guy, Commodore Matthew Perry. You don't need to know his middle name, although it's pretty cool, Calbraith Perry. But anyway, the Commodore here secured trade with Japan in 1854 because he led a U.S. expedition of naval ships all the way out to Japan right after the U.S. war with Mexico. And homie got us trade with two ports, two areas in Japan, which it's pretty important. And the reason it's pretty important is that Japan had been isolated from Western influence for about 200 years. So they sort of refused to trade with anyone. And the fact that this guy was able to kind of come in here into Japan, into the harbor, and secure trade with a relatively hostile Japanese people, because you have to imagine that the Japanese don't want to trade with any Westerners here. So they've got their kind of like battleships out there in the harbor, and they're sort of telling these Americans to kind of turn back. But Perry doesn't give up. He kind of comes back again, and he eventually gets us this trade. So it's a pretty big deal for the U.S. Now here's a Japanese woodblock painting of Perry here in the middle, and sort of these two high-ranking American naval officers. But you have to imagine that the Japanese sort of have these impressions of the Americans, and this is really interesting to me because it's from the Japanese kind of point of view, right? You often learn in American history about the American point of view of all these things, but here's the Japanese sort of POV, and you're getting kind of an insight into what they thought of these people. Now, obviously, I don't read Japanese here, but I imagine that they're sort of describing the way these guys are dressed and the kind of attitudes they bring and the kind of objects that they have with them. The objects that they have with them. And you can imagine that this might have been like the talk of the town. A lot of Japanese people were probably discussing these things. But anyway, here's Townsend Harris. I'm going to go ahead and erase that marking there. And the reason I bring up this character here is because in 1856, this guy returns to Japan, comes to Japan, as the U.S. consul. And again, this is a pretty big deal because it's the first time that Japan kind of allows a Western consulate, that's the word I was looking for, to open up in Japan. And Japan's government is sort of signaling here that they want to trade with us. They want to normalize relations with the United States. And don't think that it's just kind of a one-sided thing. Don't think the U.S. is the only one kind of getting a deal out of this. Japan is getting something out of this too. You have to imagine that the Japanese are sort of considering this as an opportunity to modernize Japan. See, Japan had been isolated, like I told you before, for a long time, and this is seen as an opportunity for the country to become a lot more powerful. And it eventually does lead Japan to become a kind of a military leader by the end of the 19th century. So Japan kind of militarizes. And this is going to be important later when we study World War II. You'll see that that can be traced all the way back here to the 1850s. And by the end of the 19th century, Japan is a militarized nation. And just for kicks, I wanted to show you a cool picture here. This is the 1860 Japanese mission to the United States. This is a photograph by Matthew Brady here. And I just want to show you the kind of people that Japan was sending out into the world as it's sort of exploring its options. So you see these Japanese men kind of sitting here, and then these sort of American dignitaries back here. And this again is sort of signalizing a normalization of relationship here between the U.S. and Japan. It's a really cool relationship that still exists all the way to today. All right, this is the last part of our series. And remember, this is all about how the U.S. acquired territory and how it expanded in the 1840s. I hope this was helpful.